Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Adventures in Crowdsourcing, New Destinations with FHWA EDC6 Innovation. My name is Zach Pleasant, and I'll be helping with facilitating today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCO. As a quick reminder, if you don't know already, at NOCO, we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. On the bottom right side of your screen, you can see a box called Useful Links box. You can browse through those links for resources and news. Previous webinar recordings and case studies can be accessed from there. Now I'll cover a few logistics from today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, and the recording, along with the presentation slides, will be available through the on-demand learning section of NOCO's website. All attendees' phones are in listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the question discussion pod for comments and questions. We have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, we encourage all of you to enter them in the questions pod as they come to your mind at any time. The questions will be read out loud one at a time by the moderator, and our presenters will answer each question. So that is all I have. And with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Nathaniel Price, to start us off.
All right, thank you, Zach. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Adventures in Crowdsourcing webinar series. We're glad that you are here to learn more about crowdsourcing for advanced operations. Our goal today is to explain why your state or local agency should consider implementing this innovation and how our team can help accelerate your path to significant operations and economic improvements in transportation using crowdsourced data. As Zach mentioned, my name is Nathaniel Price. I'm with our Oregon Division Office of Federal Highway Administration, and I was a member of our EDC-5 Crowdsourcing for Operations team in our last round of EDC, and I'll be moderating today's session. Joining me today, we have 4 exceptional speakers from our EDC Crowdsourcing for Operations team today. Toni from our FHWA Arizona Division, and Ben, Vaishali, and Kelly with AEM Corporation will all be presenting today. Before we get started, just a couple of short announcements. As Zach mentioned, we'll do all our Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please put any questions you have into the chat pod throughout the presentations, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. The other thing is we will also be doing some poll questions throughout the webinar to get some more information from you as attendees. So our first poll question, we'd like to know what agency you represent here today. Okay, it looks like we've got our responses. Thank you, everyone. And looks like we have some pretty good representation from state agencies, regional agencies, local agencies. So good participation today and representation. So with that, we will get to our first speaker. And our first speaker is Toni Whitfield. And Toni is the operations engineer for the Federal Highway Administration's Arizona Division. And in her role, she works with her partners to improve highway safety and mobility through operations programs and projects. Welcome, Toni, and take it away.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Hello, everyone. Nathaniel mentioned, I'm Toni. Today I will provide an overview of the EDC6 Crowdsourcing Program and themes. And over the next several minutes, I hope to answer some of your questions about the what and why of everyday counts and crowdsourcing. So let's begin with answering the question, what is everyday counts, or EDC? EDC is a program that uses a state and local-based model to identify and rapidly deploy proven yet underutilized innovations. EDC innovations typically have one or more of the following benefits, as you can see on the slide, and that's shortening project delivery, enhancing roadway safety, reducing traffic congestion, and integrating automation. To date, there have been 5 rounds of everyday counts, and each round is a period of 2 years. And over the life of EDC, a total of 52 innovations have been advanced. This round is round 6, and it will run from January 2021 to December 2022. So EDC6 funding opportunities are available for stakeholders that include State Transportation Innovation Council funds, we call that the STIC incentive funds, as well as aid demonstration funding, accelerated innovation deployment funding. With STIC, each state has a State Transportation Innovation Council, and it is intended to bring together public and private transportation stakeholders. The council evaluates innovations and spearheads their deployment in each state. Funding availability is up to $100,000 per stick per year, and that supports the cost of standardizing innovative practices. The EDC teams also have created a list of suggested STIC incentive projects to help advance each of the EDC innovations. The aid demonstration funding incentive is eligible for stakeholders to accelerate the implementation and adoption of innovation in highway transportation. It helps to offset the risk of trying an innovation that is not routinely used. Federal Highway is currently working on a new Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, and you may check the EDC website for updates on that NOFO. One example of a STIC incentive funding has been used to promote crowdsourcing in Missouri, and they have used a small portion of their available funding to attend peer exchanges to learn more about the use of crowdsourcing. One example of an aid demonstration grant is a state setting up a regional transportation data portal. And the purpose of that was to undertake a new planning project that would result in the development of a data portal to facilitate sharing and coordination of data. So for more information on eligibility, the EDC website is a great source for information. Another source is staff at the Center for Accelerating Innovation, and as always, your Federal Highway Division office is a great source as well. So what exactly is crowdsourcing? Simply put, crowdsourcing is the practice of addressing a need or a problem by enlisting the services of a large number of people via technologies. So there are 3 distinct elements here, the need, the people, and the technology. The most prevalent sources of crowdsourced data integrate multiple types of information, kind of like a mixed jelly bean jar. So mobile infrastructure, such as smart cones or vehicle-embedded friction sensors, and other devices that transmit data in real time offer great visibility on performance and opportunities for predictive systems management. Vehicle probe data, vendors use GPS information from commercial fleets, cellular triangulation data, real-time connected vehicle data from specific auto manufacturers, and historic data to transmit travel time and speed. Navigation apps from the private sector, along with Agency 511 apps, generate event data such as slippery roads, flooding, stalled vehicles, crashes, and even faulty signal lights or a downed stop sign. And finally, social media in the form of tweets are used by agencies to monitor for certain events. In EDC5, Adventures in Crowdsourcing webinars, that's a series that's hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, and this includes a webinar on operational successes using social media. So our innovation casts a broad net in defining crowdsourcing. So why should you as a state or local transportation agency select this EDC6 innovation? Here are 3 primary reasons. First, free or low-cost crowdsourced data offers new customer-centric capabilities such as personalized and predicted traveler information, reduced operator workload, and enabled performance analytics, all of which improve operations. Second, crowdsourced data helps detect incidents and other congestion-causing events more quickly on both primary and secondary roads, thereby avoiding roadway incidents, reducing secondary crashes, and improving travel time reliability. And third, crowdsourced data helps agencies better use their ITS infrastructure. It potentially retires faulty signals. It expands monitoring geography by expanding ITS sensors. It also drives smart ITS infrastructure deployment. And all of this saves operational costs. The bottom line is crowdsourcing is proven lower cost solution to improve safety and operations. And through this webinar, we will explain how crowdsourcing leads to these benefits and why agencies participated in this EDC5 innovation are choosing to continue to participate through EDC6. Through the EDC5 crowdsourcing program, more than 20 states have advanced and are reaping benefits in the terms of improved operations and safer, more reliable roads. There have been 5 states that were initially not interested in crowdsourcing, but have since embraced this data source and advanced in operational capabilities. And nearly 40 states and local agencies have benefited overall. In EDC5, most participating agencies focused on improving one aspect of operations using crowdsourced data. The low-hanging fruit included traveler information and incident management. However, now with EDC6, we're looking to help agencies integrate multiple sources of data and support use of data across multiple focus areas, including the 6 illustrated here. So we're not limited to just traveler information and incident management. There are many other areas such as maintenance management, work zone management, road weather management, and traffic signal management. Some agencies are looking at even more creative applications of crowdsourced data for strategies such as ramp metering, variable speed limits, ITS infrastructure, deployment planning, and broader investment decision making. So why is crowdsourcing continuing as an EDC6 innovation? Well, most agencies have the potential for far greater benefits. Some agencies have used crowdsourced data for one application, say traveler information, and now can use this data for many other improvements such as signal management. Nearly every agency will benefit from advancing their data management practices and from improved real-time data integration and sharing capabilities. Many agencies do not yet archive their crowdsourced data. Doing so will allow them to conduct traffic studies and make data-informed strategic decisions. This is why crowdsourcing for operations will continue as an EDC6 innovation and what we hope to help you achieve over the coming 2 years. So our team of FHWA divisions, state and local champions, and our local experts will help your agency establish deeper crowdsourcing roots that yield a bountiful crop of benefits. Our program is now planning for a new round of EDC6 support. So get your request in early to your STIC or your division for potential support. There are a variety of resources to assist agencies in exploring and learning and implementing different opportunities for crowdsourcing. And these resources include opportunities to participate in activities such as webinars, workshops, peer exchanges. There's technical assistance. We are available to support collaboration within either a region or a state to advance crowdsourcing. We're also exploring the level of interest in taking part in a community of practice. And this may be in the form of hosting monthly virtual meetings where participants can share expertise and pose questions for peers to provide insight. And there are many resources available on the EDC website, such as fact sheets, case studies, and videos. A great way to stay up to date on this innovation is to subscribe to Crowdsourcing e-News. And finally, you may also subscribe to the EDC News weekly newsletter and the Innovator bi-monthly newsletter to keep up to date with the latest information on all EDC innovations. You can do this by visiting the EDC website or texting FHWA Innovation at the number on the screen. And this concludes my slides. Thank you for taking the time to listen and engage in this innovation. Now I'll turn it back over to Nathaniel.
Great, thank you, Toni. Appreciate that. And please remember, if you have questions, to enter those in the chat pod so we can get to those at the end of today's session. Before we get to our next speaker, we do want to take another quick poll and note, does your agency currently do any crowdsourcing? We'll take a few seconds to answer this poll. All right, so it looks like we have quite a few agencies that are actually using crowdsourced data, so that's good to see. Anyway, thank you. We'll go ahead and close the poll and move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker will be Ben Pachot. Ben is a data scientist with AEM Corporation and serves as a technical data management, governance, and integration expert for the Crowdsourcing for Advancing Operations team. And welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel. Yep, I can move the slide. This is great. So I will be talking about some of the findings from the NCHRP 08-116 that we have actually led about managing data for emerging technology, which aligns very well with crowdsourced data, actually. So this actually was recently published, so you could actually have access to it if you go to the TRB website. So the objective of the project and the background pretty much was that new, big, and varied data sets were now available to transportation agencies, and they were becoming pretty much more numerous and more voluminous. The data had tremendous potential. We had, IoT devices on the side of the road, connected cones, upcoming connected vehicle data, social media app, and a lot of different things like this. But the volume, speed, and granularity of that data was unprecedented and was pretty much a shift in what transportation sector has been using so far. So the research objectives were to develop a framework on how to manage this data coming from these emerging technologies, and including, you know, data from, like I said, connected vehicles and any other mobility initiative. We actually had an outline on the process of applying this framework then, once we defined it, and how to help agencies, you know, incorporating it, knowing that it was kind of an interesting and difficult challenge for them to shift to making decisions using data that way rather than the traditional way they had. So what were the challenges that they were having? Well, they were, for one, rather reliant on traditional, which, let's say, database management system, and a lot of their data management was centered around the relational databases. This was great. It's been working very well for 40 years, but unfortunately, the kind of data that crowdsourced it in particular, and the data coming from emerging technology, is just too large, too varied in nature, and changes way too quickly to be able to be tackled by such an approach. It's not enough, and it's not sufficient. We've heard countless stories of agencies that try to make these fit into their system and ended up with catastrophic failures. They had to take weeks to recover. Breaking down the silos and the businesses, the data actually has to be a bit more valuable, and it's valuable for a lot more, and having the duplication of the data across many silos, across an agencies of business, across business units, it's actually not the best way to use it. So this is challenging because this is the way it is. The value of the big data is not quite recognized yet, and the imminent need of getting ready for it or switching to it is also not quite there yet. So we needed to communicate or make pretty much statements on why it is needed and why it works. The full understanding of the benefits and the use of the cloud-based architecture, or at least whatever it's on-premise or in the cloud, it doesn't matter. It's more of the way the cloud tools are structured to deal with this kind of data and this kind of, I would say, granularity, speed, and volume in order to do this is not quite understood, and there are a lot of perception that things need to be done differently, because they kind of conflict with it, and we'll see that a little bit later. And having difficulty hiring experts, especially in the modern data management professional, because they are getting better paid if they go work for private sector. And there's not that many of them. It's increasing, but it's still not to the point of being there. And what we've also seen is vendors providing services to state agencies, but also with quite a black box, quite restrictive. So we're seeing this a lot in crowdsourcing. And the lack of experience allows for a lack of control, where there used to be control for the data that would come into a DOT through sensors or any other things that they would control, that they would maintain, that they would pay contractors to do. These crowdsourced data sources in particular are often controlled and pretty much provided to them for free or in a different type of agreements where they're very limited with what they can do with them. And the negotiation is something new, and not everybody is really ready yet to figure out how to make the best out of it and how to be suspicious of the information that they're being given, because crowdsource is crowdsource. There is noise and there is human errors as part of it, and you need to understand how you need to deal with it in order to get that, and don't believe what the vendors tell you necessarily. And they're often ill-equipped to handle the level of big data at an organization level. So we have a little quote here from one of the CD we worked with, which was, our big data issues are straightforward, like we don't have the technology, the money, or the skills. So I'm going to go a little bit into the big data, the typical buzzword that people have been saying a lot, but it refers to pretty much data sets that are much more vast and complex than what you typically work with. Meaning if it sits on a spreadsheet or inside a relational database, that's not what we're talking about typically. But it can also not just be the size, it can also be the different type of data sets that you're dealing with that make it too complex to deal with. It typically means that you are going to use different type of strategies or non-traditional strategies and technologies to do it. So if you're looking at fixing something with a traditional relational database, well, typically big data, not necessarily. You're going to use statistical approach, you're going to use filtering, you're going to get text search, you're going to use graph analytics, you're going to use aspect of searches to be able to solve the questions that you have that are not part of your traditional architecture. Typically because relational database cannot perform this on such data set. Vendors of relational database that tell you they can, that's because they added big data capabilities in parallel with the database and charge you a fortune for it, pretty much. It's an approach to generating knowledge. One of the big problem with big data is it's all about finding the needle in the haystack, sort of, or getting an understanding of this. The key is really to get information, the actionable information out of a lot of data. And data is so large and so varied to analyze, and the speed is such that it exceeds the capacities of those traditional tools. So being able to make that is very difficult. And data in terms, it also means like structured and unstructured data. You don't just have what fits into a relational database. You have images, you have text, you have sound, you have signals, you have everything you can process into this, and you can combine these together as well. So this is also a problem. But it would eventually, can be used to lead to better decisions. It's also a new attitude that goes, for everybody, government agencies, nonprofit businesses, that by combining data from multiple sources, you get better insight. Everybody talks about prediction right now, but just state of the practice, see what's going on, is already becoming much more clear that it could already lead to a better decision. I mean, we've seen this with things like Waze, where the limited capabilities of visions that states could have with their camera network system and the 511 system, Waze could pretty much provide locations of incidents that are happening, for example, that nobody had detected yet because nobody called and there's no camera to verify it. So this is where the advantages are coming, and there's a new attitude towards using it and then becoming pretty much able to see what could be trusted out of it. So I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit if I can out of this, otherwise I'm going to switch to my slides so I can see these challenges, because there's quite a bit. But this is pretty much just a separation of the various aspects of what modern management for big data is concerned with and how it contrasts the traditional management. And this is done across like 11 kind of dimensions about the system that we've done, but typically it is inspired by what's called distributed systems, and this is done because of the complexity that we were talking about. Rather than having a system that has a limited amount of data, that is not too varied, well controlled, and very little, you have something that varies a lot, that has new data all the time, and that changes constantly. And you cannot build a system the same way that you're gonna use to analyze it. So the traditional systems pretty much they have a predefined purpose. The design for a traditional system, predefined purpose. All requirements are done ahead of time. 80% typical system engineering, and then it's developed and maintained for 5, 10, 20 years depending. Well, the case of modern system, the system is designed to be able to handle the unexpected. It's modular, and it's capable of adjusting and being updated constantly in order to analyze new pieces of data or data that is changing. And the system flexibility, the traditional system is pretty much meant to be robust and steady. It's not meant to be changed. It's actually has a lot of rigidity in its policies and the way it's being updated, and it's not easily modified on purpose because we want to preserve this. In the modern system, it's actually entirely ephemeral and flexible, and this is a challenge when you're talking about management and data management, but it is designed to expect change and to be easily adapted, but you have to still keep controlling it, so this is quite of a challenge. In some cases, they can actually detect changes automatically and adjust automatically to them, which is a plus, but it still needs to be watched. Hardware and hardware longevity and software longevity, typically, because of the state of the requirements, traditional system, the hardware would be there. And then you would keep that hardware and keep the reliable system. Same thing with the hardware and software. The modern systems aren't, I would say, married to a typical hardware platform or a typical software platform. There's abstraction layers between them, and they can be changed. New software can be rolled in, old software can be phased out. New hardware can be rolled in that was more performance, cheaper over time, because this happens pretty much every 3 to 6 months currently. And in order to not get stuck for 5 to 20 years with very high expenses, you pretty much are able to bring that up. One of the most important one is referred to as schema first and schema last, or schema on write or schema on read. And one of the traditional aspects is that you load the data into your system as data management. You load the data into your system, pretty much with a specific organization of the data, as data schema, if you will, as you are loading it into the system. This ensures that you pretty much have one pair of glasses, that you look at the world through the data that's coming in, and that's, you have to pretty much think of the schema ahead of time and handle all the questions you want to answer with that schema, and then load the data using that schema in the query, and then you can only ask those questions that you thought of, and then if you want to ask another one that is not handled by the schema, you have to change the schema, which is a pretty drastic one. The modern systems use what's called schema on read. They load the data as is, they augment it with quality assessments, they make it open as possible, but they only apply the schema as they're querying the data, so as not to limit the number of questions that can be asked on that data. Very, very different. The storage and processing is typically centralized, while on the modern one it would be distributed. That's to be able to scale easily in case more data comes in. Another one would be the majority of the dollars expenditure for data systems in the traditional was going to maintaining software and hardware, lots of maintenance, and about, I would say, the typical 80-20 rule, 80% in maintenance and maintaining the software, and only 20% like actually using the data. In the modern system, it's pretty much flipped, especially if you're using cloud and shared infrastructure. Yeah, this is actually becoming obvious that you have a lot more time to deploy, to give to data and analysis with the flexibility, and a lot less maintaining the system. And the other thing is the data governance. Rather than having IT strict control and centralized data governance that decide what everybody in the company needs to follow, or in the agency it needs to follow, the data governance needs to become distributed with distributed, I would say, authority and responsibility between business units and I would say a CIO office or a data governance office. I'm going to go to the next slide. So why should agencies move toward the modern data approach for government? Well, pretty much there's going to be an unexpected amount of data coming in that transportations are going to have to adjust to, and this is coming at a rapid rate. It offers the potential to uncover insights, drive better decisions. You can talk to agencies like KYTC, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinets. They would be one of the best examples of people that have started doing this and how it transformed them over the last 5 years. The value of the data cannot be easily and efficiently extracted through transitional methods. A lot of them are losing it. And as data sources become more varied and change more rapidly, the traditional system can't cope with it. It's just not possible. So you have to do something else in order to move on. So the guidebook that we put together is available. There's pretty much a modern big data management framework that has over 100 recommendations that is available to pretty much move towards something that is more modern, flexible, scalable, and sustainable. There's a roadmap on how you begin to shift towards this architecture, toward this, technically, institutionally, culturally. This is also part of the model. There's example and references. I mentioned KYTC, that's one of them. And there's also a discussion on the misconceptions of what the transportation is regarding big data management and how this can be remedied. And this is a list of supporting resources and tools that you can find online and where they are. There's a template plan, there's a data catalog tool, There's a maturity self-assessment tool as well, and there's an FAQ. Thank you very much. Thanks, back to you, Nathaniel.
All right, thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, please enter those in the chat pod. Our next speaker is Vaishali Shah with AEM Corporation. Vaishali is another member of our crowdsourcing for advancing operations team. Has worked with multiple states and local agencies to advance their use of archived crowdsourced data. Welcome, Vaishali.
Thank you, Nathaniel. What I want to talk about today is the significant value that agencies are already deriving in terms of the archives that they maintain of crowdsourced data. What I want to talk about are three parts. One, why archive the data, how agencies are doing it, and some examples, two from county and city and two from a state. So with that, let me just go ahead and get started. First of all, there are two different definitions of archiving. One is a very data management focused definition, I think, which Ben would come from, and that is that as data becomes less frequently used and accessed, that it be moved to a different system, a broader system for long-term retention, perhaps maybe not as frequent in terms of real-time use. So that's much more of a IT definition. But what we want to talk about here is making sure that data that's coming as a streaming source, so whether it be Google or Waze or INRIX or any other real-time, say, Twitter tweets or other types of crowdsourced social media data, that you're not looking at it in real time and then just forgetting about it, that agencies are actually archiving that data and so that they can make better use of it. And then it's also data that comes from vendor products, and some of the ones that have been featured previously through the Crowdsourcing Innovation are Haas and Makeway, and those are products that notify travelers through the Waze platform of responder activity, as well as some of the others. So now that we know what we mean by archiving, why archive that data? You know, it's that philosophy of what is measured is performed and improved. So by archiving these data and making them available within the agency, not only in operations, but broader you know, areas, whether it be environmental or safety or traffic signals, you're able to track performance, and you can do that by region, by time, and other factors. And you can identify gaps in terms of operational performance, and then have quantified methods for prioritizing resources based on those gaps, as well as to help communicate to leadership within the agency, as well as with partners or with local governments, the value of the work that transportation agencies do. And one of the things that the EDC 5 and 6 programs try to push is that even if you don't have resources to currently analyze and make the best use of the data that's coming to you, by archiving it now, you develop a store of data that you can then use to get a feeling for how your system is changing over time, even if you aren't necessarily looking at it today, tomorrow, or a month from now. And the EDC-5 program helped a couple of states begin archiving their raw data, and I think that the program is available through EDC6 to help state, regional, and local agencies do that as well. So the question next is how and who archives that data? It is a very blended field right now. There are some IT departments within state or local departments of transportation or divisions of transportation that archive data that we're talking about in this realm of crowdsourcing. Sometimes it's the ITS group or the operations group that does it directly through an ATMS or other types of systems. Often it's a vendor product that is made available to do this data archiving, and quite often for state DOTs, they leverage university partners. So the examples of the applications that we're going to show you include all of those partners in terms of who archives the data, and how it's archived really is evolving, but there are some considerations. Some agencies use a vendor-based product, and so then to access that archive, you actually have to have an active subscription to that service or that product, whereas others actually archive it in an open source format, either through structured data, data management systems such as Hadoop, or unstructured or structured data like SQL, the traditional way that agencies are doing it. Although SQL now has NoSQL and other products that allow for unstructured data archiving. And then the next question is, now that you have this data, how do you actually make it accessible to everyday users, whether it be a traffic engineer or a policy analyst? And so there are some general sets of tools that are used, and they sort of blend the analysis and visualization components. Python, SQL Server Analysis Services, Cube, AWS, and I mean, there's a number of tools that support the analysis of this data. And then for visualization, the common tools are Tableau, Power BI, ArcGIS, Excel, and then Jupyter. And then there are university-based products such as RITIS, which comes from the CAT lab at the University of Maryland, that sort of does offer a suite of templated analyses that agencies can make use of. And one of the nice things that is evolving, particularly for vehicle probe data, is a lot of states have started evolving to purchasing of that data that makes it freely available to regional and local agencies that want to use RITIS or want to use products like INRIX data. And that's a really exciting opportunity for quote-unquote free data of pretty high quality for agencies that was not available before. And so what are the types of decisions that can be made with this data? And that's really the key. How do you improve your operations by making better decisions? And some of this is in prioritization of tasks or how tasks are performed, and we'll provide that example through traffic signal management. Changing practices at the program or project level. So sometimes these data can be used to, for example, change the safety service patrol routes or the routes for road weather management that are chosen, or the applications of different materials, when it's snowing, for example, or where there is reports of icy roadways from, for example, Waze or 511 apps that allow users to report issues. And then there's enterprise-level decisions that inform investments and project prioritization. And so we'll get into that with our examples. And then finally, right down to the examples. We have, like I said, the City of Louisville and Lake County Division of Transportation. Both of these agencies mainly use Waze as their form of crowdsourced data. And then Virginia and Indiana DOT, and these are two agencies that we highlight that use vehicle probe data from, I believe, INRIX for both of them. So on to the City of Louisville. So it's been quite a few years since the City of Louisville started archiving the Waze jam data as well as the Waze incidence data. And they found that the jam factor within Waze is a really great surrogate to measure the efficacy of improvement. So this little tool on the bottom right is one where you can pick a corridor, pick time of day, peak periods, and it shows you what the before and after is when the agency, for example, does striping or signal retiming or other improvements. And Louisville has been collecting this data for many years, archiving it and making it accessible through Power BI. So that's one example of the value of archived data. And they share this data with others within the agency, and they use it for hotspot identification. And they also, for example, will compare the Waze reports of potholes with their 311 service report of potholes to see where there is an overlap and where they want to prioritize resources in terms of fixing those potholes. The next example we have is with Lake County, Illinois. Lake County is just north of Chicago, bordering Lake Michigan and the state of Wisconsin. It is a county with, which is relatively advanced with regard to traffic operations. They have a passage ATMS system to operate their arterial corridors using over 400 CCTV cameras and over 600 connected traffic signals. The county uses automated traffic signal performance measures that get pulled into the passage system and that report about every 15 minutes the performance of the signals and the amount of traffic and turning movements and so many other factors. But that in and of itself is not sufficient to some of the work they wanted to do. So the crowdsourced data that fueled many of the archived applications in Lake County is WAYS. They defined through the WAYS interface hundreds of road segments within their county's arterial roadways, and for those road segments they pull travel time every 2 minutes, and this is something that's freely available to any county or city agency. They use this data for corridor travel time analyses where infrastructure changes are made, very similar to what Louisville does, but they have more detailed data because they pull this travel time information. And then they share the benefits from any improvements in corridors with the county board and to the public to demonstrate the value that their organization provides to the county, which has been really useful in terms of justifying future funding. They also use the travel time data to measure things such as reliability, and they compute the 90th percentile travel time as one performance measure for reliability. And that's what this graph you see here on the bottom right is. Lake County also integrates this travel time data with their ATSPM data, which offers the volume data on arterial corridors. And then using these two data sources, they can do signal coordination and timing studies pretty much on demand for free. Whereas they traditionally were, doing floating card studies and putting out pneumatic tubes and having people out there, and it was costing maybe $15,000 to $20,000 to do a SCAT study. Now they pretty much do it on demand in real time, not in real time, but as and whenever needed. So this graph I'm showing you on the bottom right is a good example for when demand dramatically changed around March of this year, which we all experienced. Within a few days, the agency reviewed multiple commute corridors. The one you see here is for their US 41 corridor. And they looked at how the travel reliability pre-restrictions are compared to post-restrictions, and that's the purple versus blue. So there was a huge change and decrease in demand, and there was a decrease in the reliability. There was an improvement in the reliability, the travel time. But it wasn't a huge improvement. You could see around 8 a.m. there was a big improvement here, and then again around 4 p.m., PM peak travel, there was an improvement. But the engineers, based on the decline in volume, felt that there could be a much better improvement. And so they retimed the signals based on the WAYS travel time data and their ATSPM data. And the improved signal timing is demonstrated by the red as compared to the green. The green is free flow travel time. And so by changing the signal timing on this corridor as well as many other corridors, they saw a dramatic improvement in the planning, the 90th percentile planning travel time. And so they were actually able to demonstrate and monetize that value, over $1 million just from better timing the signals for the progression for the lower traffic demand. So this is the power of archived WAYS travel time data and their integration with ATMS. Lake County also provides a number of real-time applications, including incident responsive signal management. So if there is a major crash that blocks a roadway, they are able to identify that crash more quickly and then change signal timing progression for detouring around the crashes on arterials. And they're looking at expanding that to weather responsive signalization as well. So a lot of great value from the archive data as well as the real-time data. The next two states I'm going to talk about are Virginia and Indiana. So let me first start with Virginia DOT. Now, whereas the counties were pulling in free travel time and free event data from WAYS, Virginia also pulls WAYS data, but most of their archived applications use data from INRIX and the RITIS platform. And so they do the similar before and after evaluations and the performance measures that we talked about with the counties, but then they also are including those performance measures in project prioritization. And so their system is called SmartScale. And so they use a couple of performance measures within this SmartScale process to prioritize projects. So for example, one of the factors in SmartScale is safety, and that one of the performance measures is a decrease in the person hours of delay. And so this graphic you see up here on the upper right-hand side shows sort of the monetization of the decrease in delay, and they use that as a SmartScale performance measure. They also use travel time reliability as an economic development performance measure, and then they use some of the secondary benefits from reducing congestion in terms of emissions reductions as an environmental measure for air quality and energy and environment effects. They use this huge the volume of data for other efforts such as simulation calibration, corridor and hotspot identification, and they're now looking at it for measuring work zone queues. So those are some of the archive data applications in Virginia, and Indiana DOT is one of the states that has been an exemplar through EDC5 and will continue to be for EDC6. They are one of the pioneers in terms of innovative uses of the INRIX data. They pull that data in real time, and then they have been partnering with their university, Purdue, to develop a number of tools. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but I wanted to highlight just a few of those, and that includes work zone monitoring, signal timing, and capital project selection. So the first one is work zones. So they have a weekly report that they can produce using their tool for work zones, and it talks about things, you know, identifying the route, identifying the dates, direction of traffic, and then, you know, the length of the queue, the hours of queues length that are greater than 5 miles, a lot of other performance measures. And these are reports then that help in terms of the planning for the work zones in subsequent periods of time. And then they use the heat maps that many of the other agencies also leverage, and they use them to look at the crashes and events that occur in work zones. So it's the integration of the incident data with the travel time data. One of the key features of the tool set that they have is in arterial retiming, and this is an example from a north-south corridor in Como, Indiana, and it's a 9-mile segment. And they use the INRIX data that they pull on arterial corridors to basically do a before and after study, like with the other 2 counties in the state. And one of the things that they do is they use the TTI measures to actually quantify the benefits from the retiming. And so travel time savings calculations for this one corridor were over, you know, $2.7 million just in terms of the travel time savings, and then the additional benefits from emissions reductions that are on the 2 following columns of this data. They also then use that same travel time data to look at the prioritization of corridors in terms of travel time. And so this is an example of the x-axis here is the normalized travel time, and then those that are over 100% of the normalized travel time, these bottom SR37, are the ones that take priority in terms of signal corridor retiming. And then they use also this data for capital project investment analysis. And what they do is they look at the change in the delay, the delta, from year to year on major interchanges, and then that is used as the prioritization for capital projects as one factor in capital project improvements. So I think I've inundated you with a lot of examples of archive data use, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to talk about real-time data uses. There is definitely overlap between the states and their archived and real-time applications, but I also want to acknowledge the information that was presented today comes from some amazing national exemplars. And so Michael Schnurley from the city of Louisville, Justin Eppinger, Lake County, Scott Howard and Nina Lockwood, and many others from Virginia DOT, and then Ed Cox and his team from Indiana DOT. So with that, I will pass it on to Kelly, or I guess I'll pass it on to Nathaniel. Thank you.
Thanks, Vaishali. And our final speaker for today is Dr. Kelly Peixoto. Kelly is a Senior Director of Transportation with the AEM Corporation, and Kelly is also an expert on crowdsourcing for advancing operations for the Advanced Operations Innovation team, where she applies her research and practical experience in transportation operations, safety, and ITS to advance crowdsourcing for operations. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Nathaniel. So I'm going to focus on, and just a quick kind of back to what Toni presented at the beginning, and kind of the 4 roots of the EDC6 crowdsourcing for advancing operations innovation. And Ben spoke about the data management route and some ways in which agencies can start to take a more modern approach to data management to help with crowdsourcing data and crowdsourced data. And Vaishali talked about the route of archiving data and how many agencies are not yet archiving their crowdsourced data, and by doing so, that can help expand the applications and use of crowdsourced data. And I'm going to talk about the last 2 routes, and that is adding data sources and applications and sharing and integrating data. And I'm going to, as Vaishali did, just use a few examples from states that kind of reflect these different routes of what we see for the opportunities for EDC6. So by thinking about these different routes, you know, and the fact that this crowdsourcing innovation has been around for the last 2 years as part of EDC5, really it offers, EDC6 offers opportunities for not only the states and agencies that are new to crowdsourcing and, you know, relatively new to crowdsourcing. Certainly there's great opportunities for new agencies and in particular regional and local agencies to get involved in EDC6. But it's also a good opportunity for states that have been involved in EDC5 or states that maybe weren't involved in EDC5 but are already fairly advanced in maybe one application or a couple applications or a couple data sources. So, you know, EDC5 really did help a lot of states get started with crowdsourced data and help them advance from the development stage to the demonstration or even the assessment and institutionalized stage. Often it was for one application of crowdsourced data or one type of crowdsourced data. So returning states or states that are advanced that didn't participate necessarily in EDC5, I think there's still a lot of opportunities to consider participating in EDC6, and that is, again, these routes of expanding the data sources that are being used or expanding the applications that are being used, and also considering ways in which these data can be integrated with other agency data to expand applications, and also how the data can be shared that helps expand the use of the data and these applications. So just following up on this expanding the crowdsourcing value, again, states have demonstrated that that they can show added value when they use one source of data for multiple applications, or they can demonstrate value in crowdsourcing in general by showing all of the different applications that can be made or can be done with crowdsourced data. And so we're going to focus just on a few states. This is by no means an exhaustive list of how different states and agencies have expanded their use of crowdsourcing, but we just picked for the presentation a few examples that we thought were exemplary in sort of demonstrating these routes of data integration, data sharing, and expansion of applications. So the first one is Ohio. So Ohio has really focused on using probe-based speed data, and it is by doing so they have expanded the coverage, their geographic coverage beyond where they have fixed sensors like many states. So they use the INRIX data in real time for incident detection, traveler information, variable speed limits, and they also look at WAVE data to verify the nature of an incident detected through INRIX data. ODOT uses the INRIX data archives, so kind of back to what Vaishali was talking about, to track TSMO performance, road winter weather performance, and to better manage arterial traffic signals and monitor work zone performance. And they also offer an annual training for MPOs and local agencies on how to access the INRIX data through the RITIS platform. So Ohio is a good example of taking one source of crowdsourced data, and in this case probe speed data, and applying it in a lot of different areas that has allowed them to improve their performance and have better information about their system. They're also looking to, they're working on a better and more efficient process to match this data to their linear referencing system. So that would be sort of the next step in looking how to integrate the data with existing DOT data to give them more information. The next example is Connecticut. So Connecticut, the example for Connecticut is integrating crowdsourced data for better use. So what Connecticut has focused on is integrating WAVE data into their Crescent ATMS software. So this software provides an integrated ATMS functionality statewide. It does bring in inputs from external agencies, third-party real-time traffic data providers, and weather information. It has an integrated sign control that allows them to put real-time travel times on their DMS statewide. It also allows an operator at the TMC to review these WAVE traffic events, and then if it is verified, they can automatically create a Crescent traffic event from the WAVE, which saves time and reduces operator manual workload. And their system can also send traffic events to WAVE so that WAVE users will see that information. And the Crescent database allows data to be stored, the WAVE data to be stored. So this is a great example of data integration, and they're also looking to use this WAVE data to support real rideshare and parking information. Just a quick screenshot of their Crescent system and how they can filter by different TOCs, by different event types, by different roadways. And so the way they have designed this is with a lot of filters that help kind of reduce the fire hose of data coming from WAVE, and so that they can really focus in on certain roadways, on certain event types, and in certain areas. So the next example, which is a fantastic example, and some of you may have heard Chris Lambert from KYTC speak about what they've done with data, and I know Ben referred to KYTC in his presentation. They really are a great example of moving towards modern data management principles for their data. They started about 6 years ago with one source of crowdsourced data, and that was WAVE, and one application, and that was snow and ice management. And over the last 6 years, in really focusing on managing their data in a more modern way and bringing in and integrating not only crowdsourced data, a variety of crowdsourced data in addition to Waze, ProbeSpeed, Twitter, CocoRoz, which is a crowdsourced weather weather data. They've integrated that with DOT and agency data. So things like ATMS data, truck parking, AVL, and by doing so, they have been able to create like currently eight different applications, which are listed on the left, on the bottom left, and are in the process of working on 4 more applications. So they have really taken a data-first approach to getting their data in order and really understanding the data and managing it and integrating it, and that has really allowed for so many different applications and uses across the department, not only for operations, but also safety, maintenance, and planning. So Arizona has also made some great advancements during EDC5, particularly with vehicle probe data. They've created a data pipeline that allows them to calculate in real time travel times and post them on rural DMS statewide. So they've been able to improve the coverage area and the accuracy of that information that they're providing to travelers. But what I wanted to highlight about Arizona was their innovative data sharing. So, and they're not the only state that has done this, but ADOT from the beginning, after the procurement of the probe data, really wanted to share that data with local and regional agencies. So that was part of the agreement with the vendor, was that they could share the data across the state with other agencies. And so at that time, they conducted a regional training so that everyone could really understand the data, some of the challenges with using the data, and how to use the tools. And from their perspective, this went a long way in getting the local agencies and the MPOs started using the data, and they feel like it's been a real success in collaboration. And one of their objectives for EDC6 is to put together a user group, a statewide user group, that will allow them to continue these efforts at the local and regional level to help expand the use of the data. And finally, Indiana DOT, which Vaishali talked about a lot of great applications from Indiana DOT. But again, it's just another data sharing example of how the data can be shared. So the Indiana DOT Delta Speed tool shows real-time traffic queuing and abrupt speed changes. And the TMC uses this tool to support incident detection. But they also make the tool available to law enforcement officers that are stationed at work zones. And that way, these officers can monitor the queues and respond in a more timely manner. So again, just another example of how sharing data with other agencies can help to expand the use of that data and the applications for that data. So Nathaniel, I think it's back to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kelly. So we'll just skip into our Q&A session. Didn't get any questions from the audience, so I'm going to throw a few out there to get us started, and maybe we can get some folks to add to this. First, I guess, Toni, from when you talk about EDC 5 and some of this, a lot of states have already done this. What states have been able to advance their implementation of crowdsourcing during EDC 5, and which ones haven't, and maybe why weren't those states able to advance their programs?
Sure, Nathaniel. So there have been many states that have advanced crowdsourcing in EDC5. Arizona, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Virginia has advanced, Colorado, Puerto Rico, Alabama, Maine, Wisconsin, and many others. But they have improved their operations in areas of traveler information and traffic incident management, as well as road weather management, performance reporting, and other areas. However, there have been a few states that were challenged to advance. And for one agency, negotiating the relationship with data providers took nearly 2 years. And it finally happened, so they have just begun to advance crowdsourcing after a couple of years. So for others, the challenge of advancing was related to staff time and funding. And a third challenge is in the realm of technical skill sets. And this is one in which, through our innovation, we have been able to help those agencies move crowdsourcing forward.
Great, thank you. And then I guess another question for you. When I think of crowdsourcing, I think of like Waze and those, but there's other, it's probe data. So we have a lot of vehicles out there that are functioning as probes. Is that considered crowdsourced data for this implementation?
Yes, absolutely. Probe data is considered crowdsourced data. And crowdsourced data is data that is actively or passively collected from the larger population. And most probe data providers are getting this information from commercial vehicle GPS, connected vehicles, navigation app data, and cellular-based data.
Great. All right. And then how do agencies balance the, driver distraction versus, pushing for greater crowdsourced reporting? How do they balance that potential concern there?
This is Vaishali. I can answer that a little bit. So I know that there's a challenge in terms of distracted driving that is increasing on our roads, and so some of the strategies are for the states that do support crowdsourced reporting, that they do it as a hands-free feature. It's voice-based, and oftentimes now there are OEM integrated data collection. So for example, Waze reporters can actually use voice-based reporting. Then there are states that say, do sort of propose or advance this reporting, but they do it from, your passenger to report it, not the driver. And then more and more agencies recognize that the nav app providers are passively collecting this information so that it reduces that driver distraction. And then one of the things I think that also folks wonder with regard to crowdsourced data is, how are these reports validated? And so for Waze, which is one of the big elephants in the room, there are two factors, reliability and the number of thumbs up, that can be used as a measure of data validity. There have been some states that have been doing comparisons between Waze reports and other sources of data, such as vehicle probe data, and have shown that oftentimes the reporting that comes through Waze is earlier, and sometimes it's later. But by having multiple data sources, the value is that you hear from one of the many data sources to overall improve, at least for incident detection, a quicker time. And then the I-95 Corridor Coalition, which is now the TEC Coalition, does conduct annual validations of multiple vehicle probe providers for freeway and arterial corridors. And there was a webinar through the Adventures in Crowdsourcing series that showed that particularly for arterial corridors, the quality and the accuracy of the data has actually improved in the last few years. And they do that comparing those provider data with Bluetooth data for validation. So hope that answers that question.
Great. Thank you. All right, we do have a question from Stephen Levine has asked, he wants to know, has anyone been able to use crowdsourced data to provide real-time parking information, either at transit park and ride lots or truck parking locations? So let someone answer that.
I know that there have been agencies that have been working towards that, but I'm not sure that there's been a fully successful response or solution. I know Virginia DOT has been looking at it for truck parking locations. At one point, Wyoming DOT tried to support some information through their 511 app that, you could report whether the truck parking location was full, partially full, or empty, and it was a sort of qualitative assessment that, other truckers could report. Particularly for that truck parking, there are some trucking apps that are now beginning to support that. But in terms of like park and ride locations or transit locations, I think it's still a strong lean towards infrastructure-based systems versus crowdsource-based systems. But I think one of the things with connected and automated vehicle data that is coming up, that may become much more possible. So, there are some vendors. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. So we've ran across an example with, I think it was the Los Angeles Sports Authority, where they were tracking through geofence, and the geofence could be added to a parking, pretty much transponders from trucks. And they could pretty much, they were trying to track trucks as they were making their way to the Port Authority facility, and while they were in the Port Authority facility, and where they were staged to park and whatnot. So this kind of usage would work if you set the transponder to trigger on geofence that would place the different ride lots, the different parking lots. And that's for trucks. It's still a pretty controversial topic, especially in industry and among states, because there have been examples, I'm not going to cite the states, of attempt from one state to another to try to steal commercial freight activity there was a big hub in one state, and they were trying to identify how they could move it to their state. So sometimes the truck companies are not too keen on sharing too much of this because they don't want to be the subject of this kind of move or open their secret, quote unquote, to the competition as well. Because the moment you start sharing this with an agency, it's a problem. If you're, I believe Steve works for Transcom, but if this is an agency that cannot be FOIA, that becomes a bit easier to get. As for the transit parking, and if you're talking about regular passenger vehicle, not freight, there are technologies, but you have to equip the parkings with them. Otherwise, with crowdsource, the density, you won't have a representative density of every single vehicle, because everybody would have to use the exact same app in order for you. But you could geofence Waze alerts, but the Waze alerts don't really give you much. And most of the time they're on the roadways, people are driving, so you're not going to have them while people are parking. Probe data, same thing. They may have some of that through the apps that they have, but you have a portion of the amount of vehicles that are there. Same thing with connected vehicle at this point, because it's only a very small amount of vehicles that are connected on traffic. So you will have that information for a few of them. So the best thing at this point is to rely on counters that can be deployed and connected that get real live parking information. And honestly, all you need is some kind of vehicle counter at the exit and entrance of the parking lot, and you'll have a real-time count constantly.
Great, thank you. So I do have another question. I'm curious if there's any information on the cost of crowdsourced data.
I can talk to a little bit on the cost of crowdsourced data. So as we talked about the travel time and event data from Waze, as a Waze CCP partner, there is no cost. However, there is going to be some cost in terms of the IT infrastructure and the time for staff in terms of, developing that agreement, processing and archiving that data, and then using tools to show value of that data. So, that could be as little as a few emails. Like, for example, Lake County has open source code that they've been sharing through a couple of our webinars in EDC5. And there was a city in California that, had a couple of emails back and forth. They used the GitHub source code and was able to start pulling data on about a dozen or two corridors. They were already a WASE CCP partner. So that's sort of the low-hanging fruit. There's definitely a more significant cost in terms of vehicle probe data, and we've heard from different states, depending on the quantity of data, the number of miles, whether that data sharing agreement includes sharing that data to local partners. It could be a couple of $100,000, or it could be in the high hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that depends on the size of the network and the agreement in terms of agreement and negotiations. But we've also seen from agencies that the benefit cost analysis is pretty significant in terms of what the agency would have to spend in terms of ITS infrastructure deployment through, whether it be CCTV cameras or roadside infrared sensors or other technologies in terms of measuring travel time and queuing type data. And so, while that cost is a little higher, there's definitely, I would say, more states that now access one or another form of crowdsourced data than do not.
Great. All right. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for participating today. And did want to thank our speakers again for providing information on the EDC6 innovation on crowdsourcing for advancing operations. And, hope our folks that attended today were able to learned a lot about crowdsourcing and will choose to implement this EDC6 implementation. And again, feel free to reach out to our team for information on and assistance in implementing this EDC6 innovation. And thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. I also want to thank our panelists and moderator. We had some really good information here today. Like I mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar along with the presentation slides will be available on the NOCO website. On behalf of the National Operations Center of Excellence and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Zach, would you please show the last slide? Thank you very much. Just a disclaimer.
Oops. Sorry. There we go.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone.